Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful Monday in the spring. I'm so excited to be back with you for ascendLIVE. And after a few weeks off, this episode couldn't be more exciting. We have with us Mita Mallick, one of my favorite. I'm a huge fangirl of yours, Mita, as you know, on LinkedIn and beyond. And we're super excited to have you today to talk about inclusive leadership and how people can become cultural catalysts in the workplace with everything going on right now. So thank you for joining us, Mita. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to this conversation, Lola. It's the first time we're seeing each other visually because
I know we've done so many audio lives.
Yes, and you're one of my new friends on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is such a platform of generosity, and we'll talk about that. But I've met so many people through LinkedIn during this pandemic when we've all been isolated and craving connection.
Same here, absolutely. And like Mita meeting you, I think it was first on Fishbowl, was one of those pivotal moments where we realized that just because everything's going on with the pandemic doesn't mean we can't be networking. So thank you for gracing my life with your presence. So I'm not sure if I've given you the background before. Ascend is a show I created to help marketers level up to new levels of success, to sort of achieving our full potential, and specifically with the focus on women leaders. And you're in the LinkedIn group as well. So this is kind of like, you know, it's such an amazing moment to have you here to share that inspiration for everyone in our audience, marketers and beyond. So shall we get started?
Do it.
All right. So Mita, tell us a little bit about what led you to your current role. I know you have an amazing history in brand across CPGs, and now you've moved into the financial sector, tech startup. Tell us a little bit about the journey line.
Well, it all starts from back in the day. I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised in the US. My younger brother and I were raised outside of Boston and Massachusetts. And we were a handful of families of color growing up. And my peers let me know every single day that I did not belong in that community. I'm sharing my story much more broadly now, but I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically growing up. And so that was something that was happening, along with the fact that I didn't grow up in the Instagram era. I was craving Black and brown role models. I was reading Essence. I always say I identify deeply with the Black community. I don't identify as Black. And I was looking for, if you can see it, you can be it. And I didn't see any of that. I also didn't feel like I was represented in products or services. I remember my mother trying things in the kitchen for my hair or skin. We would spend summers in India and she would be bringing back products. And so I always just wondered why people who looked like me weren't included in advertising. And that's really where I became a very passionate storyteller. So if I tell you all that, it's no surprise that I had a long career and I still consider myself a marketer in consumer product goods, in beauty. I say my husband is the foodie. I am not. I'm all about community and conversation, but I'm a beauty obsessive. And that's what I spent many years doing. And so it was at Unilever that I was asked to lead diversity, equity, and inclusion for the company for the first time. And I sort of paused because I thought I was going to just stay in the marketing lane. And it was my younger brother who said to me, but you've always been a champion and change agent in the brands that you've worked on. And now you get to do this at a corporate level. So that was my journey. I then, at Unilever, we were really thinking future forward. And so I ended up also leading cross-cultural marketing, which is multicultural marketing and more, which we can talk about. And then I've been now at Carta, 7 months. And I had a really great run at Unilever. And I wanted to do something very different, which we can talk about, but really show people that I could also work in a small startup versus a very large public company.
I love that. I mean, we need those examples of fluidity across a career path, especially with women of color. And Mita, through experiencing your content, I can feel the authenticity of what really draws you to this space. Now, we didn't plan this question, but I will dive in a little bit more. I'd love to hear about that moment when you were approached at Unilever to lead DEI and then ultimately cross-cultural and multicultural marketing. What did that look like? Why you?
Well, I said no 3 times. I said no 3 times. I had the CEO come ask me 3 different times. I had different career sponsors ask me, and it was not what I had envisioned for myself. I was wanting to run Baby Dove or Lipton or insert brand in the Unilever portfolio. I had just led the hand and body lotion portfolio, which I was really proud to sign award-winning activist and actress Viola Davis. and worked very closely with her to help turn around the Vaseline business. And so I didn't think that I would go into DE&I or whatever that meant. And I had my own biases on what that meant. And so I think
people talking about this a lot, Mita. Sorry to jump in there, but this question of, is it appropriate for people who could lead P&L lines, who have the skill set, who are people of color, do we do ourselves a disservice when we sort of go into the D&I track within these major corporations? So was that kind of one of the biases that
I had a friend who said that to me, who said, are they trying to sideline you? Why are you taking this role? But I firmly believe, and I think, Lola, this is why you do the show, is that inclusion is a driver of the business.
Yes.
So I'm very passionate about the intersection of inclusion and marketing. So knowing that about myself, I was like, I can do this job and make it more than what it is on paper. And so to everything to our conversation is like, go after the jobs, take the jobs that don't seem as glamorous or don't seem like they're in the limelight. Go in there and make it your own and make it so amazing that when you leave that role, you have a line of people wanting to take that job that no one else wanted before.
You created it. I love it. I hope everyone takes that away. Become the person in the role that you want to, create the kind of impact that you want to create. You said it really beautifully just now. What was that line you just said? I don't want us to lose that.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Mommy brain.
Playback. Yes.
You make it your own.
Yes.
A job that was not desirable before you had it. When I move on, I know that there will be 5-10 people lined up wanting that job.
Yes. Making it more than it is on paper. That was what you said.
Making it more than it is on paper. And so that's what I've done with every job that I've had, because I haven't always gotten the jobs that I wanted, right? It's been hard internally. We can talk about that. Whatever unconscious or conscious bias we faced in our careers. But I just sort of came to a point, was like, I'm going to take it and no one else wants it. I want it, and I'm going to make it better, 10x than when I received it. And so I hope, especially in the pandemic, I know so many women, particularly women of color, who are out of work for a number of different reasons. And so if you're trying to get back into the workforce, it's really hard. We all have a vision of like what we want to do and the job description. And I'd say let go of it and just think about what your skills are and where can you make impact and get points on the board in that assignment, in that role you're applying for.
I love it. And it's such a great segue into this part of the conversation around what makes a leader, an inclusive leader. The advice I just heard you give is one of the things I'd put on the list. How do you help people shape a future for themselves, that really takes advantage of what makes them great, instead of having people work on the things that aren't their strengths, the whole good to great thing. What are some other ways that you think about how you define inclusive leadership for everybody watching who may not be thinking as intentionally as people like you are right now, Mita?
And this is some of the work we're doing at Carta. I like to really think about inclusive leadership. There's so much. Google it right now. There's a lot of it. And I find it to be very academic and theoretical. So let me break it down for you as what I think about as a leader. Okay. I think about, who have I invited to the meeting? Think about that. We're now in a remote world. I know things are changing, and some of us are going back and hybrid and all those things, but like, there are no excuses. There hasn't been in this last year. If you're in an environment, and God bless, and I really thank our frontline workers, we all have the privilege right now. We're sitting in our homes. So if you have a meeting, check your calendar today and this week. Who have you invited and why? It's not like we're going to cram in Lola's office and there's only 2 chairs. Now I have to sit on the radiator. No, the virtual table is very large. And I know there is this tension between how productive a meeting is based on the number of attendees. But I would argue, like, are you bringing the people who had the idea to the table of what you're presenting? And then are you creating a space where I feel comfortable actually to speak up? And when I do speak up, will my idea be honored and celebrated, or will it be dismissed, or will it be taken by somebody else? And then once we leave that room, the idea that I've given, how do you continue to let me co-create? And how do you continue to let me be part of whatever that initiative is? And so the thing I like to say about inclusive leadership, Lola, is it's a destination, right? Not a destination, it's a journey, right? There's no A+, there's no like, hey, I got this. It's continuous learning. And my God, it's easy for me to say, I'm such an inclusive leader if my entire team acts like me, looks like me, and thinks like me. Well, yeah, then it is easy for me to say I'm inclusive, right? And so challenge me and challenge leaders on that. Like, what does that mean?
You know, you really reframed it in a beautiful way, because from what I'm hearing, inclusive leadership is less about how do I direct these people who work for me, and it's more about how do I allow the full spectrum of my team to actually become leaders.
Absolutely.
We have some amazing comments coming in. Shima says, keep the inspiration up with guests like Mita. That's easy. Our friend Callie over at LinkedIn News says, great pairing. And Kishla, really loved your comment. The virtual table is large. That's powerful, but also has an anecdote to share. So let's just digest this. Kishla says, I had this happen to me in my career. I was offered a location. It was less desirable and almost denied better locations. So I just went there.
Love it. Love it.
Were there any moments like that in your career, in any of your roles, Unilever, beyond Mita, where you really made lemonade out of lemons when it came to what you were assigned?
Gosh, I can think of so many assignments. I can think of working in major corporations unnamed, where I really wanted to be on that like rock star brand, right? And I kept applying and kept getting denied and rejected for all different kinds of reasons. And sometimes going to those brands that are not getting as much budget, that don't get enough visibility. Like, what can you do to put your mark on it? Because I would argue some of the really large brands that we all want to work on, some of the lessons learned there have been, it's like you're a small cog in a wheel. There are so many cooks in the kitchen, right? If you think of like a really mega brand, insert brand's name that we all sort of...
That was where I started.
Right. And so you think about, wow, but there's so many people, right? And I love Dove. I worked at Unilever and worked on Dove for many years. That's like a huge machine, Dove. Right. And think about the brands that don't get enough love or respect internally, right?
How much impact can you have if you have that assignment that not everyone is desiring?
Yeah, and think about being an entrepreneur, meaning an entrepreneurial spirit, but think about how you can do it in a large organization by going on an assignment that not many other people want, or think, oh, that brand is in double-digit decline. They're going to sell that thing. And it's like, no, go in there and see what you can do and put
be the turnaround star.
Yes. Turnaround star.
Nick is jumping in, says, seize the moment. Refreshing here, me to talk about taking on the less desirable opportunities. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kenneth. And yeah, you know, I think that's actually, that idea of entrepreneurship relates to this notion of inclusive leadership as well. So Mina, for anybody who's kind of trying to think about their first step, you know, I'm in my role, I have my performance plan for this year. I want to layer in a more intentional focus on creating an inclusive culture on my team and beyond. I'm not sure where to start. Like, what does the entrepreneurial marketer do at that point?
I would say, check today, go through your calendar invites for the rest of the day and this week. Who are in meetings and why? I can remember being junior in my career and constantly like giving decks to senior people. And I never was in those meetings. And I asked myself why, right? And I'm not saying like there are certain meetings where it's like the C-suite and you're not going to be in there. But also I would just ask, like, why couldn't you pop in? Why couldn't the associate brand manager pop in and say, hey, I worked on this. I'm going to share one slide with you. Thanks so much for having me. And then, you know, literally click out. That's what we're doing these days. And so I really want us to challenge ourselves on why are we not including people who have done the work in meetings? Like, why is that? And then also, if I'm not in the room, are you making sure you're giving me credit? And are you making sure you're saying my name when the door is closed? And are you advocating for me?
That is such an issue. Like, can we unpack that? Why? I've experienced it more times than I can count. I know you have. Why is it hard to sort of say, this person who I've sort of trained and stewarded, this person whose work product reflects my greatness, why is it hard to give them that credit in the moment?
I think because many leaders have been trained in sort of the power dynamics of hierarchy. And you're seeing a shift to this where I want to be a servant leadership. I want to be a servant leader. I I prescribe to the School of Servant Leadership. My team doesn't work for me, I work for them. And so when you start to flip that and say, hey, if Lola's on my team and she's like kicking butt and taking names, that makes me look great.
Yes.
It's a reflection of me because I am coaching, mentoring, spending time with Lola. And so that's where I think there has to be a flip. And some leaders are still, I think, in this old school camp of how leadership works. And then other leaders very much understand that your team is a reflection of you.
Well, and it's cyclical, right? Like you get better results when people feel seen and appreciated. Yeah. So I love that recommendation of starting with why. If you are looking today at your calendar, like Mita recommended, and trying to figure out, okay, how do I show up as a more inclusive leader? Ask those why questions. Who's in the meeting? But beyond, well, why are those people featured on the creative? So Mita, you had an amazing article, right? We posted about it last night. Tell us a little bit about that HBR piece on colorism and kind of what inspired you to write it.
So the piece, and thank you, Lola, for sharing, is entitled Marketing Still Has a Colorism Problem. And I wrote it because it's deeply personal. Being of Indian descent, I've experienced colorism personally throughout my life. And it's not something as a community or as a culture we talk often about.
No.
And I've also experienced it as a marketer. And so for me, I'm really struggling with this notion of marketers are scrambling. They want to build brands and build campaigns and content that authentically and with purpose serve Black and brown communities. And yet we still have systemic colorism. Yes. And yet I share this story very early in my career, working with a creative director, finding like an amazing shot, I still remember, of a Black woman, dark-skinned Black woman. And the creative director saying, she's too dark for this campaign. We're not going to feature her. This is a hero shot. It's a global campaign. And
like,
it's
why don't you get it?
And also
like a hero to you.
Right. And also here I am, a dark-skinned woman.
Right.
You know, championing, and that's what I've done, Lola, as you know, throughout my career working on brands, like championing to make sure content is inclusive and thinking about who are we excluding and why. And so that's why I wrote the piece, because I don't think we talk enough about it often.
I think you're absolutely right, Mita. I mean, and especially in the age of performance marketing, and I'll be honest with you, this is part of where I struggle with it, because as you know, with my other program, Maximize the Movement, my whole thing is, if you do this right, social impact, inclusive marketing, you can actually better impact the bottom line than doing anything else. Peloton being a great example, you know, aside from the little snafu with the tread product recently, but they drove the business on the back of creating more cultural relevance. So, but in an instance where you have two ads, and I've seen this time and time again, you have someone who's fair skinned and you have someone who's darker skinned, and the fair skinned, you know, version of the creative performs better. Like, how do we navigate that?
Yeah, but it performs better. Why? Because who's looking at it? Who's telling you it performs better? Because I guarantee if you had a group, a diverse group of consumers, let's say in particular, dark-skinned individual women like myself, looking at an ad for a dark-skinned woman that's talking about, hey, finally a foundation that matches my skin tone. Does it make me too yellow, too blue, whatever? Thumbs, I'm like, yes, this will perform better. So of course you have to ask yourself, who are you testing it with?
So
right?
true.
So this is what drives me bananas.
And it's like a simple answer. So like, everybody's like, oh, that's confounding. Like I mean, it was so quick for you to get there. Even when you say that, it makes me think about all the other layers. If you can get frequency and loyalty for years from a cohort of your segment because you're the first one to show them, like, isn't that worth more than, you know, one purchase from someone in the main?
You know, and so what I say is, like, we know inclusion's a driver of the business. We know right now that Nielsen reports, and Nielsen's only one source, that there is over $1 trillion of spending power with Black African-American households. And that if you think of the whole multicultural consumer target, it's over $3 trillion in the US alone. So I don't buy when people say to me, dark skin shades don't sell.
Right.
That's wrong, because you're not actually talking to the audience and gaining those insights that would sell, right? If you are trying to sell a dark skin shade to an audience who doesn't need it, well, it's not going to sell.
Right.
I would get that. Just like if you try to sell me a Fair BB cream, it's not going to work. I'm not going to buy it.
Exactly. Well, and there are other upsides, right? Like, look at what City is doing with True Name. We talk about that a lot, you know, in Maximize the Movement. It's a great example. I may not be a trans person, yes, but I have more affinity for the City brand, knowing that they are making moves that advocate for that community. So do you think that that's part of the sort of financial argument that more marketers should be making to, you know, have their teams focus on these initiatives?
Absolutely. In the US alone, we know that if we think about intersectionality, we know that there's over $500 million worth of spending power with individuals who identify as having a disability. I don't identify as having a disability, but I try my hardest to be an ally for individuals with disability. I am more likely to buy a product as an ally. So I think when you look at spending power of a community, you also actually have to add the allyship piece.
Yes.
To your point, I am much more likely to buy from a brand when I see them showing up as an ally, or I like to say advocate for another community that I support as well. And so that's something
I wrote about this. The Edelman Trust Barometer report proved that as well.
I love that. Yeah. And it's, you know, the Edelman Trust Barometer talks, the most recent report talks about the rise in belief-driven buying. And it is across generations. It's not just Gen Y or Gen Z, or it is across generations.
Yes.
And so people, consumers like myself, are now saying, I can spend my dollars in the way I want. I'm going to vote with my wallet. And if I continue to see that you don't want to show up for my community or other communities, I will spend elsewhere.
Yep. Belief-driven buying. That is a term. Everybody write that down. Use it.
Edelman, from our friends at Edelman.
From our friends at Edelman.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I love it. So, you know, let's switch gears a little bit, Mita, because I want everybody who's just meeting you, first of all, follow her. She's amazing. You post such consistently insightful, provocative content that really forces us to think about the wide swath of inclusivity beyond any particular industry. That's part of what I find so prolific about your approach. Like, it really is, it's almost like you're an academic master of everything in the craft. How do you sort of focus on your content creation process with everything else you have going on? Like, tell us a little bit about what it looks like for you to plan a week of these amazing posts on LinkedIn specifically.
Well, I am zooming in from Jersey City, New Jersey. We have been, my partner and I, holding down, as many of us have been, 14 months in urban living with a 6-year-old going on 16 and an 8-year-old going on 18. Jay who's 8, Priya who's 6, and we've been really lucky. So we're lucky to have food and shelter, but also we are struggling, as many of us have been, as working parents. And so the way I like to create content is what works for my schedule. I mean, you look at LinkedIn, they'll tell you times to publish. What time works for me is 7 a.m. before the storm starts in my house. So that is what I'm going to publish. Is that really the best time? I don't know. I don't think so.
It's working.
All these rules have gone out in the pandemic. My other tip is that I don't read books. The last book I read was Harry Potter, Sorcerer's Stone with my son, and Peppa Pig with my daughter. I read a lot of short form content, and I usually do it early in the morning when I get up, or late at night, depending on the kids' schedule and if we've gotten them to bed in time. And so people ask me this a lot, Lola, about my content calendar. I don't have one. And so what that means is, like, I save a lot of articles I read on my phone, and I post what I want in the morning on, like, something that's moved me. And I do it through, like, knowledge sharing. I posted something this morning and I haven't checked recently. Didn't get a lot of likes. I don't really care. I mean, I think thank you. I called you out. But I think it's really important. It's the rise of the anti-Victoria's Secret brands. Amen. It's about time. And this mother providing this amazing quote saying, I can finally buy a bra for my teenage daughter that's not sexualized. And so thinking about inclusivity in size, diversity of representation in ads, this idea of having to be white and stick thin, to be proudly wearing lingerie. No. And so that I was like, yes, but I did that because I was like, wow, this is amazing. And we need to be talking about this.
It's so true. And it's moving to me as somebody who grew up. I saw the shift, right? Like, when I was growing up, there was no one who looked like me. I couldn't even find my size in Victoria's Secret. I'm going to say that on LinkedIn. It's the truth. And now we have all of these digitally native brands that are making people feel more human. Like that's what's happening there. So you posting that can inspire someone who's in any industry that kind of needs to take that mental shift and apply it to their business.
Exactly what you said, Lola. I think what's happening now is like we feel seen. I feel seen. So many people feel seen. Finally, at last. Go on Instagram, go on any of these channels, and like so many founders and people building such amazing things. It's really inspiring that speak to insights that have long been forgotten or ignored.
It's totally true. So what is an example of, now this is kind of a tough question, but you're somewhat in the B2B space, and I work a lot in the B2B space as well. How can B2B marketing leaders, I know we probably have some in the audience, apply this thinking to how they go to market? Like, I mean, I don't know if anyone from Salesforce is watching, but like, think of a company like that. What should the application be when you aren't a consumer brand?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just talking to a company that's a startup, and I won't mention the company, but great company. And it's an app that you would be able to download and aggregate all of your financial data, not just your equity, not your savings, your 401k, all of that. And then you also you get access to financial advisors. So here was my question is, what's the diversity of representation of your financial advisors? In the mental health care space, there's a lot, and this is really important as we are still going through the pandemic and trying to find what the next normal looks like, taking care of our mental health. And, as a woman of color, if I'm going to go on your app, I really like a woman of color to be my therapist, right? And so those are things that I think that's another way to be seen.
Yes.
Right? I don't know. And so I don't know how many companies are thinking about that, right? What's your ecosystem, right? And I know this is the work you do, agencies. Who are your thought partners and leaders? Because I can say, if you are honest and say, I'm working on my leadership team, it's not where it needs to be, but I'm working with Lola and I'm working with other people. And I'm creating a thought leadership, a think tank, right? So I have go-to people who are credible and understand this space. And that's what I'm doing as I work on increasing diversity of representation in my company. And I think that's what people just want, honesty. People don't want it to be hidden, right? Just be honest and upfront on what you're doing and what your plans are.
I mean, to that point, I will shout out Madwell. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they're an agency. Okay. And they brought me in to do a workshop on Maximize the Movement. How do you make a social impact that drives the bottom line as an agency? And where I think we're seeing that, I'm being invited to the table to kind of share these ideas with teams who want to be intentional about it. And I thought that was just a really great example of being bought in to the future we want to create together. We could talk to you all day. I have so many questions. But let's switch gears a little bit to current events. And you mentioned mental health, the impact of them. So the theme of this conversation we're having, we're talking about it in terms of how do you become a cultural catalyst? One of the things people need to feel is supported when they're dealing with issues. For example, everything going on in India. I know you wrote about that in Sway, sort of the effects of the pandemic that are more acute everywhere else than they are with us right now. And a lot of people might be feeling like you might be feeling like you're walking around in two worlds. One where family members are at risk and one where it's just sort of everyday life. With Black Lives Matter, continued shootings, people are suffering. So how do leaders actively provide support for their team members with these sort of really relevant but delicate issues?
Show up with your humanity. Just show up with your humanity and be human and check in on people. Oftentimes when I talk to leaders, they're always nervous about what am I going to say? Do I get the words right? We have a lot of family in India. We've lost 3 family members. I wrote a piece.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. That talks about please don't forget India. It's my please don't column on Sway. So if you can go read it, please do. But I offer a few pieces of advice. One is to give, and organizations that there's a list to give to, get others to give. I'm really proud that Carta is matching up to $50,000 of employee contributions, not just for India, but also Brazil, that has been hit really hard, where we have offices as well. The third is around mental health. Modern Health is a great company that we work with at Carta, and they have healing circles around specific topics, and they're doing healing circles that are actually open to the public. So if you want to go to the article, and the link is there, sign up, around India and the trauma and survivor's guilt that many of us are facing. And the last is just check in and connect. I received a text from a coworker that I haven't talked to in a year, who said, I know you have family in India, and I'm just thinking of you. And that meant the world. So you might get the words wrong, and that's okay. It's the intention, just Absolutely. To say, I'm thinking of you. And I think that's what we're all looking for right now, is just to know that, whether it's the continuing violence against Black Americans, whether it's the hate crimes and xenophobia against the Asian community, what's happening in Israel and Palestine, just to say, I'm watching the news and I'm thinking about you.
Yep.
I'm here if you want to talk.
Absolutely. And don't be offended if people don't write back. It's just, the outreach comes from a place of humility. I think I'm glad you touched on this, because, even in when I talk about sort of the Maximize the Movement stuff, making a social impact that drives the bottom line, the number one reason why people don't do it is because they don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to get their wrist slapped. Same with when it comes to providing support. But what if we live in a world where everyone's just kind of okay that the thing that you're doing might not be validated, right? It comes from a place of privilege to even think that everything you do should.
I think so too. I think also the other thing, Lola, is that we've been so trained as leaders to problem solve. And you're not going to fix systemic racism, sexism issue overnight. You're just reaching out to tell me that you're thinking about me, and that's it. But I think there's this inherent need, and that's where the uncomfortableness comes from, is with no solution, but I'm not asking you to solve anything. I'm just asking you to be here for me.
Yes. And that is something brands can really learn from. I mean, that's a moment right there. Yes, you can provide advocacy. Yes, you can solve systemic problems. How can you as a brand just be there for people? What does that look like?
Absolutely.
I love it. Oh, so good. Mita, there's so much that we could talk about. I want to sort of close and be respectful of your time by ending with sort of the focal point of women leaders. So that's what we're about in Ascend. That's what you are, an amazing representative who shows us all it's possible. What's your number one piece of advice for any woman who's leading a team right now?
Well, I would say bet on yourself. Bet on yourself, because if you don't bet on yourself, no one's going to bet on you. And so the confidence piece is real. Having been bullied a lot throughout my life, it shakes you, but you have to get back up and keep going and find the family and friends and allies who will support you in what you want to do. But believe in yourself, because when you believe in yourself, pretty magical things will start to happen.
Oh, Mita, that's so true. Thank you so, so much. I mean, everyone out there, I know there are people who right now might not be feeling, validated even by their direct manager. I've been in that experience, being told you're too much, tone it down. I've actually gotten feedback, your face is too expressive. I mean, and so many women deal with these things. You can't let that affect what you believe inside, right?
And I would say at the end of the day, this is the conclusion I've come to in my career, is I want to be in places where I'm celebrated and not tolerated.
Boom.
Celebrated and not tolerated. And the day that I came to accept that was the day that the universe opened other doors for me and possibilities. You're far too talented to be somewhere where you're not being appreciated. And I know it's easier said than done, but you have choices. Reach out to me, reach out to Lola. I'm always happy to have a conversation on LinkedIn.
And bet on yourself. I love it. And Lillian shows her appreciation as our last comment. Thank you so much, Lillian. Mita, you're amazing.
You're amazing. Thank you for everything you're doing, Lola. I want to come back to the show. I'll come back.
We will have you back. Absolutely. Everyone, please follow Mita, read her content. So much amazing stuff. We'll drop a few links in the chat for everyone who's watching the replay and has commented, so you can take a look at the latest writings from Mita Mallick. And Carta is lucky to have you. So I'm so glad. I have a good friend there, Chase, as you know.
Yes.
Isn't he great?
He's amazing. Love Chase.
Awesome. Okay, Mita, we'll have a wonderful Monday and week. And everyone, thank you for coming to ascendLIVE. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.